I never thought that refusing to pay my grandson's school tuition would end with a $5 Starbucks caramel macchiato hurled at my chest like a weapon. The hot, sticky splash hit right under my collarbone, soaking through my blouse and searing the thin skin beneath. Chanel, my only child, my daughter, was across her kitchen island, still gripping the cup lid like it was a grenade pin. Her voice cracked through the granite and steam. "Give money or get out." She meant it. Her hands trembled, not with regret, but rage. Her glossy nails, her gleaming backsplash, her silk blouse. None of it moved me. I just picked up my purse, now stained with coffee, and walked out the door. The strangest thing was the silence between us. No apology, no, "Mama, wait," just the sound of her ice maker clicking to refill. I drove away from my own house, trembling. Yes, my house. The Peachtree City 4-bedroom where I raised her, where my husband sang in the kitchen before cancer took him in 2016, where I planted the wisteria that bloomed too late this year. I'd handed over the keys last summer when Chanel said she needed stability for the baby, and because I trusted her, and because I was tired. I moved into my South Fulton condo thinking I was doing what a good mother does. Make room. Let the next generation rise. But that day in her kitchen, I saw it plain. I'd been reduced to a line of credit in Chanel's life ledger, a disposable one at that. What cracked me wide open wasn't the money. It was that I hadn't seen it coming. Not from her, not from the girl I'd held through night terrors, not from the young woman who once spent all her student loan refund on baby clothes because she, quote, wanted her son to feel safe. I drove until I hit Camp Creek Parkway, pulled into the Chick-fil-A lot, and cried with my head on the steering wheel. I was 64 years old, retired, wearing a coffee-drenched blouse in a parking lot, and still hoping my daughter would call and say sorry. She didn't. What I didn't know then was that Chanel had already written me out of her life plan, replacing my love with my login credentials. 3 days before the coffee incident, on October 9th, a Sunday, I was sitting in the 4th pew at First Baptist Cascade, just behind the deacon's wife, when my phone buzzed against my thigh. I'd turned off the ringer out of respect, but the vibration was persistent, rhythmic, almost insistent. It was a notification from Truist Bank, then another, and then a third. 3 failed transactions, each declined, each flagged as suspicious activity, each made on my Truist Visa, the total $3,272. Attempts at high-end retailers I didn't recognize, and all placed at 11:13 a.m., 11:16 a.m., and 11:20 a.m. I was in church the entire time, watching Pastor Elaine preach on Psalm chapter 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I remember the irony so vividly I could taste it. Right as she said, even though the earth give way, my financial ground was already cracking beneath me. At first, I thought it might be a scammer. I'd read about those breaches where your information leaks through an online purchase or a hotel stay. But the 4th notification chilled me. Attempted purchase made from your primary IP address. Please confirm identity. My stomach dropped. My IP address. That meant the attempts came from my own network. My own home router in South Fulton. I live alone. I hadn't given that card information to anyone. I don't store it on my phone or save it to websites. I write my expenses down in a blue and gold ledger and pay them off monthly. The password is handwritten in a notebook in my lockbox. Or so I thought. By communion, I wasn't praying. I was tracing steps in my mind. The only person who had visited my condo in the last week was Chanel. She'd brought Malik over for dinner on Thursday, lasagna night. She'd asked to use the guest Wi-Fi password, said her phone wasn't connecting right. I'd given it without thinking, same as I always had. That evening, I sat on my porch under the humming porch light and pulled up my browser history. I checked every digital fingerprint. That's when the first crack in my trust began to show its shape. Not a stranger, not a hacker. My own child had been inside the house, copying passwords with a baby on her hip. After the bank alerts and the communion silence, I began to replay every recent money request Chanel had made. It was like clicking through a slideshow of quiet manipulations I'd mistaken for family need. At first, it had seemed harmless enough. A casual text in late August. "Mama, can you spot me $200? I had to cover extra babysitting hours when daycare was closed. I'll pay you Friday." The phrase "spot me" sounded so light, like she was asking for a cup of sugar. She didn't pay me Friday. Instead, the next week, I noticed a $96 charge from Instacart tied to my account. I hadn't ordered groceries. I called the number listed on the receipt, some poor teenager named Alex, who said the order had been delivered to a unit in Peachtree Commons. That was Chanel's building. I didn't even bring it up at first. I told myself it must have been a mix-up, maybe a saved address on a shared device from years ago. Maybe she meant to use her own card and clicked the wrong one. But it happened again the following Tuesday. And again 2 weeks after that. Frozen shrimp, almond milk, Dove soap. Chanel was restocking her pantry and charging it to me, quietly, consistently, like she assumed my account existed to serve her refrigerator. Still, I tried to believe it was accidental. That changed when I opened a brown envelope in my mailbox the first week of October. It was a return statement from Amazon, and it included a packing slip. I hadn't made a return, so I almost tossed it out. But the total caught my eye, $679, billed to my Amazon Visa for a Dyson Airwrap Complete Long. That's one of those luxury hair tools influencers rave about. The kind of item you splurge on when rent's paid and your child isn't wearing secondhand onesies. The shipping address was listed clearly. Unit 406, Peachtree Commons, Peachtree City, Georgia. I sat at my dining table, envelope in hand, and stared at the soft glow pendant light above me, that golden dome we installed back when Harold was still here. That light had watched over birthdays, study nights, and the start of Chanel's college applications. Now it was illuminating theft. That was the moment it all shifted from suspicion to certainty. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a daughter struggling to stay afloat. This was entitlement disguised as need. I didn't tell anyone what I planned to do. Not Pastor Elaine, not my sister June, not even my old friend Vernice, who always knew when something was wrong. On Thursday morning, October 12th, I packed my Bible and cardigan like I usually do for midweek service, but I didn't walk inside when I reached First Baptist on Cascade. Instead, I sat in the parking lot beneath the magnolia tree that shades the third row of spaces, the same one where Harold used to wait for me after choir rehearsals. The air was thick with Georgia heat, unseasonably warm for October, and cicadas buzzed in the tree canopy like they were warning me. I rolled down the window, took a long breath, and pulled out my phone. Step 1 was the Truist app. I navigated past my savings, ignoring the pit that always formed when I saw how much I'd siphoned off over the past year. $50 here, $200 there. Chanel's emergencies disguised as one-time favors. I clicked on the Visa account. Under Options, I selected Freeze Card, confirmed. A small lock icon appeared next to the card number, and something in my chest settled. Step 2 was Apple Pay. Chanel had been on my family sharing plan since 2018, back when she'd cracked her iPhone screen and needed help setting up a replacement. I'd linked my card for emergency ride shares and told myself I'd monitor the use. But I'd grown lax and she'd grown bold. I tapped into the wallet settings and found 3 devices authorized to use my card. Mine, her phone, and an iPad I didn't recognize. All revoked with one swipe. Clean, cold, final. Then came the password changes. I'd written everything in a spiral notebook I kept tucked inside my ledger, but now I typed fresh ones into a Notes app locked behind Face ID. I added 2-factor authentication for every account that offered it, starting with the bank, then Amazon, then Google. When prompted for backup numbers, I removed hers. My hands shook slightly. Not from fear, but from focus. I hadn't felt this in control since my final audit before retirement. The numbers made sense again. The math was mine. Before heading home, I bowed my head. Not to pray. Not exactly. I just needed stillness. I needed to sit in that car, surrounded by hymns in the sanctuary beyond the brick wall, and feel the ground beneath me stabilize. Chanel didn't know it yet, but her access had ended that morning. silently, precisely, and without appeal. By Friday at 9:20 a.m., I was parked outside a brick office building off Washington Road in East Point, watching the sun glint off the glass signage that read, Whitaker and Bell, Family Law and Elder Advocacy. I'd made the appointment the night before after reading a local directory twice, circling names, crossing them out, and finally settling on Lisa Whitaker, because something about her credentials and calm eyes in that headshot told me she wouldn't treat me like a confused retiree. I walked in with a leather folder tucked beneath my arm. No rolling cart, no suitcase. Just the documents that mattered. Printed bank statements going back 7 months. iCloud screenshots showing Zelle receipts and Apple Pay charges. And my living will, notarized 2 years ago at the Fulton County Clerk's office, naming myself sole executor and leaving no ambiguity about who was in charge of my affairs. I had underlined the part that said, no financial authority granted to offspring without written consent. Lisa's office was cool, modern, spare, gray upholstered chairs, neat stacks of folders, a Keurig in the corner, no frills, no distractions. She welcomed me with a firm handshake and asked if I preferred Miss Freeman or Dolores. I said, Miss Freeman, and she nodded like she understood what that boundary meant. I laid everything out on her desk. She scanned the documents silently for about 5 minutes. Her pen hovered once over the iCloud screenshots. She's using the same IP address repeatedly, and the timestamps place her in possession of your access while you were elsewhere, she said, mostly to herself before looking up at me. She's exploiting you financially, Miss Freeman. We can file a cease and desist. If she persists after that, we'll escalate. It wasn't dramatic the way she said it. It wasn't pitying. It was precise, like diagnosing a malfunction in a well-oiled system. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if I had other dependents. I said no. Then she asked the question that made me pause. Do you want to preserve the relationship? I sat back, suddenly aware of the weight in my chest. The question deserved more than instinct. But instead of answering, I reached into my purse and handed her a folded piece of paper, Chanel's last text, "You owe us," sent just before I froze the card. Lisa read it, exhaled slowly, and said, "We'll take it from here." The following afternoon, while digging for a spare phone charger in my glove compartment, I found something that stopped me cold. It was an old Wells Fargo deposit envelope, soft at the corners, creased from time. I nearly tossed it aside, assuming it was one of my own scribbled grocery lists or an old church donation slip. But there, in Chanel's handwriting, sharp, wide loops with that impatient slant she'd had since middle school, were 2 lines written in black ink. Back pay from mom minus $800, and beneath it, half daycare tuition, sept, minus $450. There was no date, but the envelope was stamped, received, September 21st. I flipped it over and read it twice, tracing my fingers over her script like it was an ancient map. There'd never been any agreement about daycare. No verbal arrangement, no signed acknowledgement. Just another invented invoice, another invented debt she decided I owed. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the envelope, then texted it to Attorney Whitaker with the note, "Found this in my car. Physical handwriting, no consent." She replied within the hour, "Excellent. Keep the original. Physical documentation with handwriting supports the abuse timeline. We'll add it to the file." It was surreal, realizing how easily my life had become a case file, each memory a line item in an investigation. I hadn't expected it to feel both so devastating and so strangely empowering. When I folded the envelope and placed it back in the glove box, I noticed something I hadn't before. The faint smell of Chanel's perfume still lingering on the paper. That expensive kind she spritzed behind her ears every time she wanted to make an impression. It smelled like ambition, like someone always performing for an audience they never trusted to love them. Later, as I sat at my kitchen table, nursing lukewarm tea and staring at the growing pile of evidence, I felt a sharp pang of loss, not just for the money or the trust, but for the simplicity that used to define our bond. There was a time when I'd have recognized Chanel by the way she walked into a room, not by her trail of digital theft. Now all I had was her handwriting on an envelope, that read like a ransom note for love. That evening, back at my condo on Godby Road, I opened the lockbox I kept wedged behind the linen closet's false panel. It was an old fireproof box Harold bought the year he retired, and though the latch stuck and the corners had begun to fray, it still held everything that mattered: birth certificates, mortgage records, my pension award letter, and most sacred of all, my finance ledger. The ledger was thick with decades of entries, blue ink on gridded pages, my shorthand notations, tiny red check marks for reconciled charges. It was more honest than any conversation I'd had in years. I flipped to the section marked Transfers CJF and began matching each Zelle payment with the corresponding text on my phone, scrolling back month by month. March 3rd, emergency again, Malik sick, daycare charging for missed days. April 18th, need to fix my brakes, can you do $150? Will pay next Friday, promise. June 22nd, Mom, it's just $90 for school snacks and registration, please. I traced the thread of her asks with the precision I once used to balance municipal budgets. The pattern was so clear, I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Each debit matched an emotional plea, always framed as an emergency, always delivered in urgency, and always repaid with silence. Not once had she sent even a token repayment. Not a single apology, just accumulation. Like interest on a debt she assumed I'd die before collecting. The sum total of those transfers over 6 months came to $4,970, not including the unauthorized Instacart orders or the surprise Amazon purchases. Nearly $5,000 siphoned off my retirement cushion without so much as a conversation. I hadn't been helping a struggling daughter. I'd been financing a dependent with no intention of boundaries. I took photos of each ledger page and saved them to a secure folder in my iCloud. Then I printed hard copies for Lisa and filed them in a new manila envelope labeled CJF Pattern, April to Sept. My hands shook not from fear, but from the realization that I was finally choosing clarity over hope. For years I'd told myself Chanel just needed time, or guidance, or grace. But now the math spoke plainly, and math doesn't lie. Saturday afternoon arrived quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. I had folded laundry, swept the back patio, and watered my 3 potted ferns just to keep my hands busy. But when the clock hit 4 p.m., I sat down in my reading chair, my phone in one hand, my resolve in the other, and called Chanel. She didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. I waited exactly 10 minutes, then texted, "Please note, I've hired legal representation. All financial access is now revoked. No further funds will be transferred. Mom." I watched the 3 dots appear, vanish, return, disappear again, and then the deluge came. The first message was immediate. "Wow. After everything I've done for you?" That was followed by, "I can't believe how selfish you're being." Then came the longer ones, paragraphs full of accusations, each sentence more jagged than the last. She called me ungrateful, spiteful, even a barrier to Malik's future, as if refusing to fund private school tuition was the same as abandoning my grandson on the side of the road. "You'd rather hoard savings than invest in your own blood," she wrote. "I can't believe you're choosing money over your family." By 6:30, she had sent 12 messages and left 2 voicemails, neither of which I played. I sat with the phone screen dimmed in my lap, letting the words sit heavy but untouched. I wasn't going to justify myself anymore. I had spent months giving explanations she pretended to hear. This was not a negotiation. It was a line drawn. And what startled me most wasn't her cruelty. It was how fluent she had become in guilt. She spoke it like a second language, with rhythm and conviction. She knew every phrase that used to unravel me. Dead weight, always critical. You only care about appearances. But now, the hooks didn't land. I had armored myself in facts, in documents, in intention. My silence was not weakness, it was boundary. Later that night, I turned off my phone, lit a lavender candle, and sat in the bath until the water turned lukewarm. I thought about the years I'd mistaken my giving for love, when really, it had been fear. Fear that without my help, I'd be forgotten. But no child's approval is worth financial erasure. I was done being a donor with a mother's name. Sunday morning brought a breeze sharp enough to rattle the wind chimes on my porch, but I stayed under the covers longer than usual. My body felt heavy, not with fatigue, but with something quieter, like anticipation. I reached for my phone just before 8 a.m., expecting quiet. Instead, I saw 2 emails from Capital One, both marked Suspicious Activity Detected. The timestamps were unsettling, 2:37 a.m. and 3:11 a.m. Both were password reset attempts, both flagged for failure due to incorrect security answers. I hadn't been awake. I hadn't tried to log in, but someone had. And then came the third flag, this one not a warning, but a receipt. An Uber Eats order, charged to a card I had already locked 3 days earlier. The total was $119 for sushi, dumplings, and something called Dragon Crisps, a midnight feast for someone with access they should no longer have. The delivery zip code? 30,269. Peachtree City, Chanel's building. I stared at the screen, the details etched in real-time proof. My card had been disabled, but the cached credentials on a digital wallet had slipped through. A loophole. A last-ditch grab. And she'd used it. Not for a necessity, not for Malik's milk or medicine, but for late-night sushi. I forwarded all 3 emails to Lisa with the subject line, still ongoing. Then I opened the Uber Eats receipt and printed it, highlighting the address and card ending. This wasn't just desperation, it was defiance. It was the digital equivalent of slamming a door in my face and reaching back in to grab whatever she could. I sat at my desk watching the morning sun cut across the hardwood and thought about all the times I'd given her the benefit of the doubt. How I'd explained her choices away with words like pressure or postpartum strain or just a rough patch. But this wasn't about instability. It was calculation. I changed every password again, this time using randomized strings generated by a privacy app. I updated my Capital One settings to require call-in authentication. I added location alerts for every login attempt. Each click was a quiet reclamation, a closing of the door that should never have been opened. She was still reaching, but now I was shutting the windows too. October 14th arrived overcast, the sky low and indifferent. I was going through a stack of old HR folders from my years at the City of Atlanta when I stumbled upon something I hadn't touched since my retirement party, a brown file labeled Deferred Comp and Pension Options. Inside were my retirement account summaries, frozen balances, and contribution logs from 1993 through 2019. Pages of stability. I hadn't withdrawn a dime. Beyond the initial disbursement, I rolled into a separate savings account. One account still sat untouched, holding roughly $78,000 in principal, parked for emergencies I prayed would never come. That number had always given me quiet comfort, a fail-safe, something Harold and I had agreed to leave alone unless medical disaster struck or the roof caved in. But while cross-checking paperwork for my financial binder, I searched the account online and noticed something strange. A recent document uploaded through the school portal for Malik's private academy. It was titled FAFSA Family Statement and had my full name in the emergency contributor section. It wasn't just a mention, it was a full fabrication. Chanel had listed my retirement fund, the untouched $78,000, as an available emergency reserve to support Malik's tuition through unexpected events, signed electronically, with my name forged neatly beside hers. My heart slammed against my ribs as I clicked deeper into the portal. The entire application used my Social Security suffix, listed me as an off-site guardian, and included partial bank routing numbers she hadn't just taken from me. She had declared ownership over money I hadn't even spent yet. I printed the document, highlighted the forged fields, and forwarded the entire application PDF to Lisa. Then I sat, frozen, staring at the screensaver on my monitor, a photo of Chanel at 8 years old, standing in front of the World of Coca-Cola fountain, smiling with missing front teeth and watermelon slush on her chin. I hadn't looked at that photo in months. Now it hurt to see. This wasn't about stress. It wasn't about a struggling single mom. It was about someone who believed my assets existed to expand her lifestyle, to underwrite her performance of success. That account was supposed to be my peace. Now it was her leverage. The following evening, Just after sundown, my intercom buzzed unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't ordered groceries, wasn't due for a visit. When I checked the camera feed, there he was, Rico, Chanel's boyfriend. Ball cap pulled low, a hoodie zipped to the chin, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he had somewhere better to be, but nowhere else to go. I didn't answer immediately. I watched him through the grainy lens, the artificial hallway light casting a long shadow behind him. Then came his voice, loud and casual like we were still family. "Yo, Miss D." "Open up. Chanel said we need to talk." I pressed the intercom button. "About what?" He stepped closer to the mic, tried a softer tone. "This whole situation. She's real upset. Thought I could help clear things up." "Not tonight," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "And not here." He didn't like that. From behind the locked front door of the condo building, he raised his voice just enough to be caught on my Ring camera. "D, don't make this into something bigger. She's your daughter. You really cutting her off over a few transfers? You can't take a little help with family responsibilities?" That phrase, "a little help with family responsibilities," stuck in my throat like a stone. Help doesn't come disguised as forged FAFSA forms and digital theft. Help doesn't shout from a hallway like a debt collector. I hit the record button before he finished. He went on for another 30 seconds, pacing, posturing, saying my name like he had a right to it. Then he turned and left, tossing a glance back at the camera like he knew I was watching. I forwarded the clip to Lisa immediately with the subject, "Unsolicited visit, potential escalation." She replied within minutes, "Got it," forwarding to the documentation file. "Do not engage further." I stood at my window after he left, watching his car idle before pulling away. The street returned to quiet, but something in the air had shifted. Chanel hadn't come herself. She'd sent Rico, like I was a stubborn landlord, instead of her mother. Like this was a negotiation she could win by proxy. But I wasn't negotiating anymore. I was documenting. That night, after Rico's departure, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, a stack of old birthday cards spread across the coffee table. Most were from Chanel, pink envelopes, glittery cursive, messages that once made my heart swell. "To the best mama in the world," read one from 2011, decorated with hearts and a little photo of us in front of the King Center. Another, from just after Malik was born, said, "I hope I can be as strong and loving as you." I held them gently, almost like they were paper relics from a daughter who no longer existed. Each card felt like a fossil, evidence of warmth that had long since cooled. I read them in silence, waiting for the tears to come. They did, but not in the way I expected. Not hot and aching, but slow and steady, like rain that knows it has nowhere else to go. By the time I reached the bottom of the pile, I wasn't sad anymore. I was clear. It wasn't sudden. It had been building with every transfer, every forged document, every midnight sushi charge. What I felt now wasn't heartbreak. It was recognition. This wasn't a mother-daughter rift. This was financial abuse. Targeted, strategic, repeated. For years, I had mistaken Chanel's dependence for closeness. I believed helping her meant loving her right, that as long as I kept giving, I would remain essential in her life. But what I hadn't realized, what I couldn't see until it was printed in my own ledger, was that she hadn't needed a mother. She needed a funding source. And now that I'd cut the tap, her tenderness had vanished. She hadn't called to ask how I was, hadn't checked on my health, my sleep, my peace of mind. She had sent her boyfriend to my door with guilt and threats, and when that didn't work, she sent silence. I gathered the cards, tucked them back into their box, and slid it into the hall closet. Not as keepsakes, not as reminders, but as evidence. One day, maybe, I'd want to revisit the girl who wrote those things. But tonight, I needed the truth more than nostalgia. I wasn't grieving a daughter. I was reclaiming myself. By Tuesday, Lisa had finalized the next step, a formal meeting, scheduled for October 20th at 6 p.m. inside the Peachtree Commons HOA clubhouse, the building where Chanel lived. We filed the request under residency support documentation review and neutral pretense that wouldn't raise flags. Lisa insisted we use a public location, somewhere official, with neutral observers who could verify what was said and done. A place where emotion wouldn't override process. We sent a notice to the HOA board 2 days prior, requesting access to the main conference room. I signed it myself, in blue ink, steady hand. I wanted it on paper. I wanted Chanel to see her mother's name in a place where things had to be accounted for. That week, I moved differently, quiet, deliberate. I photocopied every receipt and rechecked every timestamp. The forged FAFSA form, the Uber Eats bill, the Amazon delivery. Each sheet slid into a clear plastic sleeve, labeled, indexed. I wanted the presentation to speak for itself. No arguments, no shouting, just dates, signatures, numbers, facts. Lisa met me twice that week, first at her office, and then at the bakery near my condo. At our second meeting, she reviewed the file and said, "This is no longer about misunderstanding. You're ready." Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was watching me closely, measuring my readiness for confrontation. I didn't blink. I didn't tremble. I hadn't told anyone else about the meeting. Not June, not Pastor Elaine, not the neighbors I used to walk with in the evenings. This wasn't a prayer circle moment. This was a ledger moment, a boundaries on paper moment. What struck me most was how still I felt. No rage, no fear, just a steady hum in my chest that told me I was finally standing where I belonged. Not in her kitchen, not outside her condo, not at the mercy of her moods, but on neutral ground, with evidence in my hands, my name cleared and protected by law. When I dropped the final manila envelope into Lisa's case file, she smiled softly. "We're not here to shame her," she said. "We're here to affirm you." And for the first time in years, I believed that distinction mattered. October 20th arrived with the quiet pressure of something inevitable. The air held a brittle coolness, the kind that makes every sound sharper. At 5:45 p.m., I pulled into the Peachtree Commons clubhouse parking lot in my silver Camry, freshly washed for the occasion. I wore my Sunday best, not church fancy, but deliberate. Navy blazer, soft cream blouse, polished flats. No perfume. No jewelry except my wedding band, still smooth from years of habit. I didn't dress for her. I dressed for the version of myself I had almost abandoned. Lisa was already inside when I walked through the front doors. She stood beside the long conference table, organizing our evidence by category: financial statements, digital logs, notarized letters. The room was sterile and bright, the HVAC humming faintly, the air thick, with the kind of stillness that makes paper rustle louder than it should. The HOA's representative, Mr. Riley, a retired postal supervisor in his 70s, sat near the window, clipboard in hand, looking exactly like the kind of man who'd rather be watching a football game than mediating family conflict. Chanel didn't arrive until 6:15. She walked in like she was late for brunch, not a legal meeting. Aviator sunglasses still on, heels clicking across the laminate floor, a fresh blowout cascading over one shoulder. She didn't acknowledge Mr. Riley, barely glanced at Lisa. When she saw me sitting upright, folder closed, hands folded on the table, her smirk faltered, but only briefly. "Really, Mama?" she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "All this because I needed a little help?" Lisa didn't let the moment drift. She calmly placed her state bar badge on the table, then opened the folder with quiet ceremony. "This meeting is to review documented misuse of financial assets and breach of digital privacy involving Miss Freeman's accounts. We've prepared a timeline and supporting documents. Mr. Riley is present as an HOA officer and authorized witness." Chanel blinked, then looked between us, lips parting slightly. She hadn't expected formality. She'd expected a lecture, maybe a tearful plea, but not the badge, not the binders. She leaned back, arms crossed. "I thought we were just going to talk." "We are," I said, voice steady. "But this time, the paper will talk too." I opened the folder slowly, with no dramatic flourish, just the quiet confidence of someone who had done the math and lived the story. The first item I placed on the table was the Amazon receipt, highlighted in yellow, the $679 charge for the Dyson Airwrap, shipped to her condo address. I said nothing, just let it sit there. Then came the Capital One screenshots, password reset attempts logged while I slept, the Uber Eats receipt time-stamped at 3:14 a.m., tied to my locked card, delivered to her zip code. I slid the printouts across the table toward Mr. Riley, who took them with a solemn nod and began reading silently. Next came the forged FAFSA form. I watched her face as Lisa handed it over. Her posture stiffened when she saw the section listing my retirement account as an emergency reserve. The fake signature. The false guardian claim. Her sunglasses were off now, and her eyes had stopped moving. I followed with the photo of the handwritten envelope from my glove compartment, the one Chanel had casually labeled with phantom debts. Back pay from Mom minus $800. I placed it between us like a final offering, though there was nothing sacrificial about it. Finally, I handed Lisa the ledger photocopies, months of transfers, each one matched to a text message or email, each plea for help paired with proof of use. Lisa spoke then, crisp and measured. We've compiled this documentation to demonstrate a pattern of financial exploitation. This is not a disagreement. It's systemic misuse. Ms. Freeman has filed for protection, and we're notifying all institutions involved, including the school. Chanel shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. You're making this sound like I'm some kind of criminal. Lisa didn't flinch. This is about boundaries and consequences. Mr. Riley cleared his throat. I've reviewed the documents. Everything is time-stamped, properly labeled. As an HOA representative, I'm noting formal concern. Any unauthorized access to this building by Ms. Chanel Freeman after today will be considered a violation, pending written consent from Ms. Dolores Freeman. Chanel's confidence faltered. The room didn't echo. It absorbed her silence, and in that stillness, I reclaimed the dignity she'd chipped away at for months. The silence after Mr. Riley's statement lingered just long enough to sting. Chanel's eyes darted toward the HOA seal on his clipboard, then back to me. Her smirk had disappeared entirely. What replaced it wasn't remorse. It was fear wrapped in entitlement. A look I hadn't seen on her face since she was a child, caught in a lie, but still trying to manage the outcome. She laughed, short and sharp. Mama, really? You had to make it this big? Lisa didn't give her time to regroup. Your actions meet the threshold for financial fraud. As of today, we are moving forward with a protection order. We've already contacted Capital One, Truist Bank, and the Department of Education regarding the FAFSA misrepresentation. The school will also be notified of the forged guardian designation. Chanel's breath hitched. No. Wait. She turned to me then, suddenly softer. The tone she used when asking for favors cloaked in concern. Mama, can we just step outside? Please? Just us. She wanted privacy now. After months of secrecy and manipulation, she wanted the veil back. But I had spent too long speaking in hushed tones, explaining myself in kitchens and car rides, handing over cards instead of clarity. I looked at Lisa, then Mr. Riley. I prefer to keep everything on record, I said. Chanel's voice cracked. You're doing this in front of strangers? They're not strangers, I replied. They're witnesses. Her facade crumbled. The polished posture, the curated calm, all of it slid off in waves. Her hand trembled slightly as she gathered the papers, then flung them back across the table. You're ruining my life over some receipts and a few late-night orders? Lisa remained composed. This isn't about a sushi order. This is about consistent, unauthorized access and financial deceit. Chanel's hands clenched into fists. I was trying to hold things together. Do you even understand what it's like raising a child alone? Trying to keep up? I didn't steal. I borrowed. I didn't respond. Not with words. I simply closed the folder, placed it back into Lisa's briefcase, and sat tall. Because what she called borrowing, the law, and my conscience, called a boundary long overdue. Within 48 hours of the clubhouse meeting, the first consequence landed. The HOA board issued a formal memo to building management and front desk security. Effective immediately, Chanel Freeman is not permitted access to Unit 306 or any common areas without written authorization from Dolores Freeman. I was copied on the notice. They even updated the access panel downstairs to remove her visitor pin. No more slipping in under old codes or charming the security guard with smiles and small talk. The door was closed, literally and legally. The second blow came from the school. Lisa had forwarded the forged FAFSA to their financial aid office, along with a cover letter citing falsified information and unauthorized use of third-party retirement data. By the following Tuesday, the school's administrator emailed a statement confirming Chanel's financial aid had been suspended pending further investigation. They used phrases like failure to verify guardian contribution claims and potential federal misrepresentation. By Thursday morning, I received a copy of her formal withdrawal notice. She had pulled Malik out entirely. I stared at the email, reading it 3 times. Not with relief, exactly, but with the strange ache that comes when justice arrives at the cost of something innocent. Malik wasn't part of this. He was a child caught in his mother's hunger to perform prosperity she couldn't afford. I ached for him, but I knew this wasn't mine to fix anymore. That part of me, the fixer, the rescuer, the silent financier, was no longer on duty. The third shift came through Lisa. Chanel had officially withdrawn the FAFSA application. The Department of Education had flagged her profile, and she'd been advised, perhaps strongly, to remove any falsified claims before further penalties kicked in. She did so. Swiftly, quietly, Lisa called that evening. She blinked, she said, which means we held the line. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. The line had held. For the first time in years, I'd enforced consequences that didn't require raised voices or broken hearts. Just documents, truth, and the quiet backing of institutional accountability. It didn't undo the betrayal, but it stitched the tear between what I'd allowed and what I'd now protect. By October 28th, the sky had finally turned, crisp mornings, soft gold evenings, and that first true chill that meant autumn had settled in for good. I spent that morning changing out my bedding, pulling the heavier quilt from storage. Not just any quilt, my mother's. The one she pieced together from her wedding dress, old choir robes, and cotton scraps from our childhood clothes. For years, it had been missing. Chanel had taken it during one of her organizing sprees, stored it in her garage under the promise of preserving family history. I had asked for it back more than once. Each time, she'd wave me off. "I'll bring it next time, Mama, don't worry." But she never did. After the HOA order, I emailed a formal request for my property's return. 2 days later, a neighbor texted me to say a clear plastic tub had been left at my door. No note, no knock. Inside, folded neatly between a bag of Malik's baby toys and an unopened bottle of my perfume, was the quilt. I held it close that afternoon, running my hands over every stitch, every faded patch of memory. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust, but beneath it, I could still trace the faint scent of my childhood home, lavender oil and starch. That same week, I closed my old bank accounts and moved everything to Georgia's own credit union. The new representative, a kind young woman named Tasha, helped me set up multi-factor authentication and walked me through revoking all previous beneficiaries. I updated my will, named Pastor Elaine as my new power of attorney, and filed the documents at the South Fulton clerk's office. No more shared access. No more blurred lines. I even changed the locks on my condo. Not out of fear, but ceremony. It felt right, starting fresh with a new key, a new boundary. That Sunday, I lit a candle, poured myself a cup of tea, and hung the quilt in my living room like art. Not just because it was beautiful, but because it represented something I had finally reclaimed. Not just from Chanel, but from my own silence. Not revenge, not punishment, just peace, sewn back together by my own hand.